Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the Earning Curve. The Earning Curve is a new platform in webinars, and we let
Lost
all
her
of you
audio.
drive the questions. So all of you get to ask some questions, put your questions into the chat. There's a thought bubble icon at the bottom of the screen. Start formulating your questions. My name is Marianne Biangardi, and I'm the head of business development at Schmersahl, Treloar and Company. We're an accounting firm here in St. Louis, and I also moderate for the Earning Curve. So today's topic is how organizational alignment drives manufacturing profitability. So you could ask our panelists questions regarding, how could I improve effectiveness and efficiency in my workforce, or how can these improvements
Hey, Pat, can you come down here for a second?
impact on
Real
my
quick.
profits?
We just went live, and when it went live for what's her
I'm
name,
sorry, I think
Marianne, to start giving her stuff, I lost all. I hear nothing.
I think Tom's on.
Hold on, real
Jake,
quick.
can you?
Yeah, I hear no audio.
I'm sorry about that. Tom, we can hear you. Oh, he can't hear us. Okay. Well, they'll fix that. So I would encourage you all to go ahead and ask your questions, put them into chat. So let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. So today our anchor panelist is Marc Bowers from St. Louis Makes. Welcome, Marc. Marc is the founder of St. Louis Makes, which is a nonprofit manufacturing organization. He's also a business owner himself with over 20 years of experience in new product development, product management, and business development. Fun fact about Marc, you guys know I love my fun facts. In the 80s, Marc spent 3 months working in a kibbutz in Israel, which is a communal farm. I actually had to look that up. When he told me, I was like, what is that? Marc can also cook minute rice in under 57 seconds. So the hidden talents we learn about during these introductions, right? Barry Gleeson from the Kelsey group is up next. Welcome, Barry. Thank you for taking the time to come on our panel today. Barry is a partner at the Kelsey Group, which is a business coaching company. He also owns a franchise with TAB, the alternative board. He's an executive coach for CEOs, as well as a certified growth coach for scaling up. His passion is helping leadership teams develop exceptional results. Or deliver exceptional results. Fun fact, he gained the nickname Barney due to a typo on the matchbooks provided at his wedding. That is so funny. I love that story. Welcome, Barry. Gregg Lederman is up next. Welcome, Gregg. Gregg is a published author and a speaker. Gregg is a professional speaker, executive coach, and New York Times best-selling author. Over the past 20 years, Gregg has worked with tens of thousands of business leaders and managers to implement performance-driven leadership, employee engagement, and customer experience solutions. Gregg has served for over 18 years as a professor at the Simon School of Business at the University of Rochester in New York. He teaches executive MBAs how to become more effective and trusted leaders in his course, which is called Leading Organizational Change. He lives in Rochester, New York. So all the rest of us are in St. Louis. Gregg is calling in from New York today. He has his wife, Karen, and his 3 wonderful daughters. Fun fact, Gregg was actually the original domain name holder for Yelp.com. He had a business of the same name and a similar business model in 1999 that he failed to get adequate funding for, and it folded in 2000. A few years later, he let the domain name expire and another firm picked it up, and the rest is history. So welcome, Gregg, and thank you for coming on the show today. Tom Lee, Tom's up next from Duct Systems. Welcome, Tom. Tom founded his own mechanical contracting company, Duct Systems, in his garage over 25 years ago. He quadrupled the size of his business, even during an economic downturn in 2008, because he taught his team to think like an owner. Fun facts about Tom: he loves to hunt. Deer, antelope, bear, and kudu. In 1978, he competed in an international skill Olympics in South Korea as the USA representative in sheet metal layout and fabrication. Before we open it up to questions from the audience, I wanted to ask Marc Bowers a starter question. After Marc responds, I would love for all the other panelists to weigh in as well, and then we can start taking our audience questions. So Marc, you work with hundreds of manufacturing companies. What do you think organizational, or why do you think organizational alignment is so important in driving profitability?
So organizational alignment is important in driving profitability because if you look at it from my operator's perspective, what that basically means is whether or not management's setting a leadership tone and a leadership path the rest of the team can follow. Nobody's going to implement organizational alignment without buy-in. And if you don't have buy-in, there's you need to be able to, as an owner or as a senior manager, you need to be able to look in the mirror and you need to be able to take ownership, no pun intended, over your own behavior and where you need to make changes, and when you need to make changes and foresee issue with a team. And all of that comes to a head at organizational alignment. I mean, at the core, that's what culture rests on. And if you don't have culture, you might as well try swimming up a waterfall. It's just, I mean, at that point, it becomes very difficult. So that's my personal opinion. Like I said, from from a line management standpoint, not necessarily from a consulting standpoint. I've not seen that outside of organizations, or not experienced that the way some of our other panelists have outside of organizations where I've worked and or been the person responsible for that. But that's my experience.
And I'd like to add a very simple phrase that we've all heard is getting everybody rowing in the same direction. And if you can't do that, I love the phrase swimming up a waterfall. I've never heard that before, Marc, so that's clever. And I've got something I could share with the audience that I think is profoundly insightful, and that is ask the leader of a company to write down 5 to 10 things that is on his mind that are key objectives for him. And then ask his leadership team separately to write down what they think he wrote down. And then compare the notes. And I think you'll find pretty quickly that there's a lot of work going on by everybody, but they're not working on the same things. And that's a really quick test of whether or not you do have organizational alignment. And it's just critical. You can't go to the final destination if everybody doesn't know where that destination is and understands why it's important to go there.
Sticking with that word why, Barry, that's how I'd answer the question. Why do you want alignment? Why is it important to driving profitability? Because we want more people to do things the way we want them to do it. And the big question for me is, what do you want them to be aligned around? Like, when you say organizational alignment, what are they aligned around? If we're talking about manufacturing organizations, I just toured a plant in the Midwest last week, and they want alignment around certain metrics for machine uptime and hitting certain targets, with the production of their product. Then we stepped into a room in the afternoon and the alignment was around the core values and who we are and how we live it. But at the end of the day, why do we want alignment? Because we want more people to do what we want them to do. And I'm not saying that in a demeaning way to the front line. It's everybody. We want leaders to lead the way we want them to. We want managers to manage the way we want them to. We want frontline people to do what we want them to do. We want that accountability. And that's the word that a lot of leaders don't like to use. Some love it and you throw it around all the time, but it makes people uncomfortable, right? We want to set expectation for what we want people to be accountable for. We want to communicate that expectation really well. And at the end of the day, it's all because we want accountability around whatever you're talking about alignment.
Engagement will not happen if the employees don't know the direction they're going. They cannot be kept in the dark and expect them to contribute. It's all about bringing their minds to the table at all levels to help guide the company. And if they don't know the direction the company is going, you're missing a great opportunity with your best asset, your biggest asset, your employees. They're the front line. They're the ones building the parts or shipping them out or taking the orders. And so often, management doesn't want to engage them for whatever reason. That's your team. That's what makes it grow and go.
Tom, to build on your you mentioned a line. Hey, I'm getting a ton of something on my end. Okay. You mentioned engagement and employees being the greatest asset. I'd push back on that a little bit. All employees are not your greatest asset. I toured this plant, as I mentioned last week, and let's assume half the workforce is engaged in that plant and half not engaged. And let's say 10 or 20% of them, maybe there's about 100 employees in this particular plant. Let's say 10 of them are absolutely disengaged. That is not your greatest asset. That's your greatest catastrophe, right? I mean, the greatest asset are those engaged ones, as Tom mentioned. So that's where alignment comes in. Some people don't want to be aligned. And if they don't want to be aligned, then they're not a good fit for your organization. Their personal values may not match with the organizational values, in which case it's, they're not a good fit, and they're not ever going to get aligned no matter how much you communicate, and putting accountability out there just disenfranchises them even further. But it's those engaged. That's the holy grail.
You hit the nail on the head, Greg. So the object of management is to sift through the ones that are not engaged and get an engaged employee group that is all of your employees to make your business as profitable as possible. So that's the management's group, is to the ones that aren't engaged or this isn't for them. Those are the ones you need to weed out and replace them with people who do want to be engaged and part of an operation.
I could add that, ask the question, what is engagement? Two things come to mind that I use with my clients. We measure how well an individual is aligned with core values of the company. What are their behaviors? Are they behaving in a way that is expected and that is congruent to the mission of the company? The second measure is, how is their proficiency? How well do they do the technical side of their job? You want high scores on both those. If you have somebody that's, I'll just put on a scale of 1 to 10. If you want somebody that, or have someone that's performing great, they're an 8, 9, or 10, and they really behave well, you love them, you'd like more of them, 8, 9s, or 10s, that's by definition an A player as contrasted to a B or C player. And those A players are deeply engaged. Those are what you want to promote.
Great point.
We have a question here in the chat. Follow up for Gregg. What are the benefits of having accountability in the organization?
Well, building on the point I said earlier, accountability means you got more people doing things the way you want them to do it. So at the end of the day, it's all about accelerating business results, right? If you think about the types of activities that pretty much anyone online here who's done a strategic plan, they're going to have cultural initiatives to try to, whether it's driving engagement or improving the work culture in some way. They're going to have customer experience or customer service types of initiatives, and then they're going to have the operational initiatives, right? And those all go hand in hand. And so when you have more engagement, more motivation and commitment to doing what's right for the organization, all those metrics tend to go up. And the secret to getting more buy-in among leaders on the cultural side and the front line is to measure those results. And that's something that I've made a living doing with organizations, is making sure that it's not, whether it's looking at the amount of recognitions of people that are being celebrated for living the values or achieving certain goals, or whether it's measuring through customer feedback, whether it's through surveys with employees. There's different ways of monetizing and connecting the results to the financial impact you're looking for. But the short answer is, you're more profitable. I mean, we can all Google employee engagement and profitability and see from industry to industry, those who have the most engaged employees, and no one's going to have all engaged employees, but those who have the most tend to be the most profitable.
On that point, Greg, if you just look at the simple math, if you have 50% of your employees engaged at a 50% level, if you took them to 75%, think of the productivity impact to the company. There's no additional dollars being spent. It's just that they're working more efficiently and more effectively, and you're going to get better results instantly. It's hugely impactful.
Huge. But you got to be careful when you're playing with numbers, because I'll use Gallup as an example. Gallup is known for measuring engagement, right? They do like 30+ million respondents a year to their engagement surveys. But then they'll do something really interesting when they go in and try to sell their different services. They'll change the metric ever so slightly. So now, let me give you an example. Maybe they're measuring engagement for all their studies to create nervousness and awareness of the need to focus on more engagement. And they're coming in going, hey, 2/3 of your workplace is not engaged. Oh no, you got to do something about it. But then when they go in and they do work with you, they change the scale. And I'm not just saying Gallup, but companies will do this. So in that initial study, you had to score maybe 8, 9, and 10 to be considered engaged. And then they'll change it to 5, 6, or 7 is somewhat engaged. 8, 9, and 10 is like super engaged. So by changing the scale, you can change that metric. So whenever you're looking at numbers, and I'm bringing this up because this is manufacturing organizations, it's all about the numbers, right? I mean, we're looking at profitability per square inch of our warehouses and how many widgets we're making per minute. You really need to pay attention to how people are measuring engagement, because it can be a tricky number.
We have another chat question here. What are some ideas on how to improve engagement? Anybody can just jump in.
I'll jump in. Ask people what they think. It's a very simple question, very simple tactic. Just ask people what are their thoughts. I don't find that happens, certainly for the line workers. Management will make decisions in a vacuum. We've all done strategic planning. Those leadership teams are in a retreat setting. They're isolated. If they have 100 employees, like Gregg's example, there's probably 5 or 8 of them in this meeting, and they're making decisions that impact everybody. And they may not know, they're not doing the work. They're leading the company. They're not actually getting widgets out the door. So asking the staff all the way up and down the line, what do they think, would surprise you. I typically will do what I call a start, stop, keep survey. Tom, I know you're familiar with this. You had some success on this. And that is asking every employee anonymously 3 questions. What should we start doing, stop doing, keep doing? And you'd be overwhelmed at the feedback that you'd get, productive and constructive.
I'll jump in on that one a little bit. Some of the things can be really simple as far as, people want to be on a team. And you want them on your team because teams are successful. Baseball teams wear uniforms, UPS drivers wear uniforms, even the people cutting grass, they're all part of a team. When you have a team effect, you accomplish a lot of minds come together. So just something as simple as a company shirt. Are all the trucks for a company the same? So they look like part of the group and part of the team. Not every other truck being a different color. Service trucks are the same across the board, like you see at Spire, or Leclerc Gas, or Union Electric. They build a reputation and a brand by building a team. People want to be part of a team. So employees are part of a team. They're going to naturally become more engaged. And when they're more engaged, they feel like their voice has merit and someone's listening to them. They want to be part of the operation. That's where they spend half of their awake life, probably. Barry, you probably have numbers on that. They want to feel welcome. They want to feel like they're a piece of it. And making decisions, like Barry said, in a vacuum and not engaging your staff, you're missing a great opportunity of knowledge that will help your team grow and help them become more engaged.
I had a comment on that as well. That's a bit of a build on what Barry and Tom had said. And actually ties back really well to what Gregg had said earlier about ultimately driving core profitability. If you think about it and you think about asking your employees what they would like, the start, the stop, the keep, and you think about what you should be doing in the marketplace with your customer base, these are not dissimilar habits and practices that you want to establish. I mean, you don't want to be producing a product, selling it to customers, and not have some kind of a continuous feedback from customers. This is simply taking that same approach to your business and applying it internally to some of your internal metrics, processes, people, etc. But you think about how this all ties together and where the engagement is. I mean, these are skills that you should already in many other areas of the business be practicing, so that it becomes, I guess what I'm trying to say in a really roundabout way is that it becomes very self-reinforcing, and you have benefits that are outside of where you immediately and obviously think you should find them. Because if it strengthens your ability to connect with your customers, because it teaches your people to get more in the habit of asking questions and getting out there and using that inquisitive nature to learn more about where there are business opportunities, then it benefits you in other ways as well. So, I just think that it's interesting that, at the core, there are other benefits here that you could measure and that you could also show an upside from that aren't necessarily in the core area that you might be looking or thinking. It becomes very self-reinforcing.
In my practice, Mark, I agree with all that you just said. I find some leaders are reluctant to ask the line staff, I'll call it, their opinion. They're not sure if they can even respond to all of it. And so they just don't ask. And so they lose out on that input of those folks. The people that are asked these questions of what do you think, they don't necessarily expect you to do what they suggest, but they certainly like to have their voices heard. And that's a level of respect. It goes back to the culture where you're embracing everybody as part of the team, to Tom's point. And so it just is really critical to embrace the input of everybody, respect their input. And if you decide to do something different than what their input is, they'll probably go along with that still anyway.
I had, that was great because you just sparked a thought that I had about some leadership examples that I thought were top notch in the area that we're talking about. So I used to work for a company that was publicly traded, and they were publicly traded small caps. Specifically, they did around $2 billion with a B dollars a year. And I ran one of the business groups, but I mean, let's face it, that's a middle management role, and I'm not the only one doing that. There are a bunch of us, and a lot of times your badge of honor comes from staying an extra hour so that everybody can see, that you're so busy on the business and all these other things. So the CEO of the company, it was not uncommon for him to wander the halls, not specifically looking for anything or looking to intrude into people's business or activity, but when he, if he was going to get a late cup of coffee or he was, had an errand at the other end of the building, he'd stop in, see his, offices were going, he'd stop in and he'd ask you what was going on and what was new on the business and everything else. I honestly cannot tell you a single thing that we talked about during those years that was implemented. And I'm not saying that things weren't implemented. What I can tell you is that I remember, obviously, because I'm recounting it, the experience of being engaged at that level and of his interest in what was going on in our specific business unit. It was a great opportunity to brag about my team, but not in the sort of politically brown-nosy sort of way, but just talk about what we were doing in the marketplace. I mean, it was exciting and fun, but a lot of times you kind of end up feeling like, hey, I'm an island of one out here. And this took that island of one away and replaced it instead with a very strong feeling of engagement at a corporate level. And it cost him absolutely nothing. It didn't cost him anything at all to stop by with a cup of coffee late in the afternoon and say, hey, how you doing, Mark? What's going on? You guys going to the trade show? What's coming up? Have you talked to this or that customer? I mean, it really, really showed you a level of engagement that would, you couldn't have replicated that at, I think, any level of investment. So, these things are, so, these ways of engaging people, a lot of times don't necessarily have to cost, a huge change in how we do business. They just need to cost a huge change in how we practice our own attitude and how we impress that down into the organization. Because you better believe that if he's doing that at our level, we're certainly inspired to do that with the customers to our business and with the people that we interact and engage with on our teams internally. So, once again, there's a very self-reinforcing benefit there.
We have another question here. How can leaders get alignment of priorities throughout the organization?
So I'll jump in here. Sorry, I had like a power surge here in the office and my internet went down, so I had to sign off and come back on. Can you ask the question one more time?
Oh, sure, absolutely. How can leaders get alignment of priorities throughout the organization?
And was the last question ideas for improving engagement?
Yes.
I'm going to share a response here that I think hits on both of those. What my clients have found is the number one way to try to drive engagement is to capture and share successes of the things you want to see more of. But when you do that, you're also driving that alignment around the top priorities. So let's say we want people living our values and hitting these top 5 metrics that drive the success of our organization. Then engage in particular managers, but all employees with the art and science of both capturing and sharing those successes. And some organizations tend to do this really well. They're using social recognition platforms, they're writing personal notes, they're talking about successes of people living the values or helping to achieve metrics at shift huddles and daily staff meetings and weekly meetings. But capturing and sharing those successes, to me and to my clients, has been the top way that leaders create the environment for more engagement.
My answer to the sound.
Go ahead, Barry.
I'll come back.
I think if I think other people are not on mute. Everybody put yourself on mute except for Barry.
Okay, let's try that again. Okay, good. So I think that there's a required healthy debate among leadership teams. So if you want to wrestle out the priorities, the leadership team, along with input from others, needs to bring their arguments to the table in a very constructive, cooperative way. A healthy debate is really required in all businesses. And I find that a lot of businesses, I've seen it in meetings, all of us have, where we're trying to play nice. And that's not necessarily productive. So I think for me, the way, and I get into strategic planning and setting quarterly priorities and annual priorities, those are a negotiated set of priorities by the entire leadership team. And if a priority I have that doesn't make it on the top 5 list, that's okay. I agree to play along and sign on to those other priorities that the group consensus yielded.
Barry, we also have a follow-up from Rob Rolfs. Can you see this in the chat? He wants you to repeat your answer. When you said the leader, not this one, but the one before, when the leader should answer.
Sure, yeah, so here's the exercise, and you can have a lot of fun with this. I do personally. So have the leader of the company write down privately 5 to 10 things that are prominent on their mind, things keeping them up at night or what they consider to be the priorities of the day. Then separately, ask the leadership team, if he came up with 7 things, tell the leadership team, Joe wrote down 7 things. What do you think he wrote down? And then see if there's alignment around those. And if you really want to get gutsy with this, take it down one more level. And it's really going to be revealing about all the different priorities that people think are priorities. Does that help?
Yep, he responded. We're good. So let's see. We have another question here. To what degree do you think leaders are actually inclined to ask for feedback from their staff versus just paying lip service to that concept? Just playing the devil's advocate for a moment, what is to be gained by seeking feedback from people on topics where employees have little to no experience or expertise?
I would suggest that it's a pipe dream to think you're going to get really good feedback. You know, it took me a long time to realize, because I was always either owning or running a business. You know, I was a leader in my company, right out of school. All these years. It took me a while to really appreciate and understand that an employee is not going to give constructive feedback to their boss in 90+% of the cases, if I had to guess. Look, they're getting food put on the table based on this job. It's their livelihood. They're not about to give that constructive feedback in general. And leaders that think they are and go and put employees in that kind of a situation, I find that quite troubling. It's not valid feedback. There are other ways to get that feedback, but it must be anonymous for the sake of the employee. Anonymous and confidential.
I agree with that to a certain degree, to a certain level. When employees are taught how the business operates, even if they're just running something through a production line, when they're taught how important that widget is that they're making and how that falls in line with the productivity and the profit and the cash flow of the company, they run their own households. They have a little business at home that they run, just putting food on the table every week's paycheck that comes in. So once they have a handle on how this business operates and what it takes for it to operate day to day, week to week, month to month, I have found that they do become more engaged because they're enlightened and they have a better inside handle on how to make things more productive or how to make things more efficient, because once they're given that little bit of rope where they know that they're in charge of their operation and they do have a stake in that operation of the company. They're not just a number. they do tend to open up more, and they do have valid points that management sitting behind a glass door was completely unaware of. So tactfully, there are ways to do that, and just by empowering employees to take ownership in their job, a lot of them step right up.
However, wasn't the question about giving feedback specific to a manager? Marianne, isn't that what, if I answered it wrong, I apologize, but I thought it was getting feedback to the manager about the manager.
No, that's a different context that I was coming from, Greg.
What was the question? Marianne, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm muted. So sorry. Okay. To what degree do you think leaders are actually inclined to solicit feedback from their staff, just paying lip service to the concept, just playing devil's advocate? What is to be gained by seeking feedback from people on topics where employees have little to no experience or expertise?
So Greg,
Yeah, so I interpreted that as they were looking to get feedback about the manager, but even so, you know, and to Tom's case there, to think that the majority of manager or majority of employees are running your business like it's their own, that's unless there's some sort of magic fairy dust, I've just not seen that materialize in most organizations. It just doesn't exist that way.
Greg, can we look I actually Tom did a really good job of letting his run the business like an owner, right?
I agree with you 100% that doesn't happen in most businesses and most employees. But in some businesses, and when it's not most employees, maybe only 50% are totally engaged and see the revenue stream, and those numbers are open to the entire company. It's amazing what'll happen through profitability and through engagement from these frontline workers. It's totally amazing. Once they're educated as far as how much money we really do not make as a manager or an owner in the product that we're producing, once they realize how little margin is in that gross profit, and then what really boils down to the net PBT, once they're taught that, their eyes are opened up and they realize how important every move they make is. And we've seen numbers jump crazy high by educating an employee to think like an owner. It's not a new idea, not a new concept, but it's just amazing. But I have found most of my competitors in the business were they don't want to let anybody know how little money they're really making. They just don't want to let them know what little bit of money they're making for all the effort they go through. And it's amazing how these people that work for you, that are part of your company, part of your team, once they're enlightened on that, they become a strong team player. Just through my experience, I
have to reiterate what Tom says. I mean, seriously, you've got people on the line that, like, in the absence of you sharing that information, or at least enough of that information with them to be clear and honest in the way that Tom just outlined, their minds are going to run. As a generalization, I find that minds run amok and people think that things are in fact more profitable and far easier than the reality of what they really are. So getting alignment around that, when people sort of see you as, oh, well, you own this business, and, as a result, by default in their mind, you're somehow rich and insulated, and the reality couldn't be further from the truth at any level of business. So I think sharing gets people aligned for a couple of reasons. It opens their eyes a bit to reality, but it also opens their eyes to the fact that there are a couple of single data metrics that you're focused on, a couple of points that are primarily driving it for you. And, then they can really give you feedback and be more helpful. The other thing that I wanted to add on that was, in terms of getting feedback and why you would source that from rank and file. So there are a couple of things that are, I think, misconceptions. Getting employee feedback does not mean management by democracy. You're not ceding leadership or ownership of the organization. You're simply looking for things that you might or might not be aware of in the appropriate context, and you're trying to validate those things, whatever pieces of information they may be. At no point are you saying to people on the floor, hey, we're all going to collectively make the decisions from here on out going forward. There is a risk there. I think that there's a risk of management by democracy being conveyed. It's also a path of least resistance that sometimes people take, even if to cut short-term corners. And I think that that's something that you need to watch out for and be very careful of. It needs to be clear up front that by sourcing people's opinion, it doesn't mean that they're running the place, and it doesn't mean that they should now be disgruntled because everything they said to you at 8 a.m. in the morning wasn't implemented by 4 p.m., verbatim as it appeared in their minds that afternoon. The reality is that you owe yourself and them an obligation of telling them that change takes time. Change is a team process. At the end of the day, you are still the leader, the owner, the senior manager, whoever, and it needs to run through the filter of you. It needs to make sure that it aligns with everything else that you know about and are working on the business. And you're very, very grateful and strongly encourage people to continue to contribute. But regardless of the outcome, it's going to take a lot of time to implement. You just need to manage expectations so that people don't think that all of a sudden, through some magical, what was it somebody said earlier, magical pixie dust or whatever, that now they've been anointed and put in charge. So otherwise, that is a bit of a risk.
We have another question here in the chat. How do you overcome business leaders who don't have the patience for implementing the processes?
Like at some point, you give people a reasonable amount of time, but at some point they need to go find something else to do, because you can't risk an entire team to an individual who, for whatever reason, isn't willing to try new things and follow the leadership and work and contribute as a part of that leadership. So, that's the brute, hard, cold, cruel, realistic answer. But, I don't even think that's a cruel answer. Because otherwise that person drags everybody else down, and you got to decide whether it's that one person that you're going to appease and they don't really know what they want or how things should be structured in a way that's even beneficial to them. And the counterpoint to that is not just the company, but everybody that works for it. So, I'm changing my answer mid-answer, but the not cruel answer is, at some point they need to, I'll say it again euphemistically, they need to go find something else to do.
Yeah, it speaks to the alignment issue that we were talking about earlier. If they're not aligned, if part of our operational goals and part of our value system is to put a certain process in place that we need leaders to get behind, and you have a leader that's sabotaging that in some way or just avoiding it, then you fire them. You take the necessary steps to help them buy in, but if over time you realize they're just not going to, then they begin to do more harm than good. And when you do let them test out the job market, you put it in the context and make sure people understand that it's really an alignment issue. And then you help strengthen that alignment. So I've seen so many companies and leaders within it let go of key leaders in a way that helped strengthen culture and the operational systems all at once.
A business is constantly evolving. You can look back over the years of being in business with any company, and they've never been there before as they move forward to the next phase or as they continue to grow. So leaders, managers, or owners need to continually change and be adaptable to change as the environment and as the business changes as it grows. And once again, that becomes from total engagement from the employees, weighing in on their thoughts on where they think the changes need to be, and what markets they may need to change into or want to grow into, and not have a manager afraid to dip his toe in that market or in that change. You can dip your toe in and see if it's progressing, but if a manager doesn't want to make any changes or agree to any suggestions like that, well, you're going to be left behind. It's an evolving world in business continually. Just look at COVID.
I think the nature of the question itself suggests that organization has a lack of accountability and lack of core values. It really does. It's you can't grow. There's an assumption that, and there's practices, companies feel that we're management, you're not. And there's silos there. And that's what we're trying to break down with the conversation about getting engagement and getting employee input, is trying to understand what's important and how to move forward. And if those recommendations come back that this is important and then a leader doesn't embrace that, well, they're violating what I believe to be, whether it's documented or not, the core values of the company. Someone's disappointed based on a given behavior. So that question is right at the heart of core values, culture, and accountability.
And one thing to add on, in most cases when that happens, the leader is agreed to do it, or they've been in that room where everybody had consensus around this is the process we're going to put into place and this is what we're investing in. It's rare. I don't know that I've even ever seen it where they didn't at least sit silent when they had the opportunity to speak up and share a concern or a reason why they weren't going to. And in some cases, they agree to it and then they sabotage it later. So the context of that question is important. There's usually more to it than they just weren't following the process.
We have another question here. Do any of you have any adjustments to your advice when considering a 10 to 15 person company? I like the idea of chatting with employees about issues, but I don't have time to find out what Gregg said is accurate. I don't think people are honest with me because they don't want to get on my bad side by mistake. Gregg, how do I get the honest feedback if not by direct contact?
Well, that's a lot in that question. I mean, first off, if it's a 10 or 15 person company, culturally, that's usually a very different experience. There's much more interaction with the key leaders. The relationships that are established are often more tight knit. There's more accountability just because there's more visibility typically in a company like that. So I think you've got to keep that in context. But if you don't have that direct contact, then the only other way that I can think of is to allow people to anonymously write type up their thoughts and submit it. But what I find typically in an organization of 10 or 15 people like that, and I think someone else was talking about this earlier, maybe it was Tom, you can sit down and have those candid conversations and create a safe environment for people to speak up. If they're not happy with the way something's going, they usually have a reason why, in which case to be able to run a well-oiled machine, no pun intended, of 10, 15 people in a company, that's a benefit to only have 10 or 15 people, because creating alignment among 10 or 15 is a lot easier than 100 or 150. So it's about, I would schedule time to sit down, create a safe environment for sharing those ideas. And there's a lot that goes into creating the safe environment from the leader's perspective and how they listen and how they take in information and what they do afterwards.
I echo everything Gregg just said. The start, stop, keep questions that I shared with the audience, I use in practical terms with every planning client. And we do that by SurveyMonkey is our platform, and we do it anonymously. And I did this recently in a company this size. It had, I don't know the count, maybe 12 employees. And the feedback was 9 pages long, and it wasn't widely spaced. And the most critical issue that came back was poor communication, ironically, because that's a lack of engagement or lack of talking with each other, both bi-directional communication. But the ownership and the leadership team from that simple survey of that small population was overwhelmed by 9 pages of commentary that they weren't getting otherwise. So it was an anonymous, confidential survey format that solicited that, and they had to react to it. You don't want to ask employees those kinds of questions and not react to it. You have to at least acknowledge it, set out a plan, set the priorities, and move towards whatever their suggestions may be if they make strategic sense.
Jumping in on that, and I'd be interested in others' perspectives on this, but one thing that I've seen when it's a smaller team or a smaller organization as well is sort of taking a page from the Oscars, where the Oscars voting, the votes all go to an accounting firm, and it's a trusted accounting firm, and everybody knows that they're neutral and they're third party and they're outside of the mix. So if you have some kind of a survey that needs to be sent out and you want people to truly know how much you value anonymity, because I think it was Gregg earlier, that maybe Gregg or Barry, that had mentioned the importance of that. Have them send them to an outside external consulting firm that is maybe your accounting firm, could do that for you, or maybe that's something that a consultant could do for you. Somebody that everybody on the team knows that these are going to be answers that are reported back in aggregate, and they're not going to be identifiable, not even with the syntax of how because like a lot of times when you get an anonymous answer back, but it's verbatim, you can recognize the style. People need to be comfortable that that is even going to be diluted, that these are going to be rolled up and reported on, but there's nothing, like literally nothing, that could be used to trace them, and that the firm that's guaranteeing them that is a firm whose honesty and integrity rests on that. So if I were a smaller firm, I would pick an external consultant or possibly an accounting firm, because those are the individuals that are trusted uniformly, and I would use that as an approach.
And sticking with the theme of alignment again, how alignment drives manufacturing productivity and profits. When you come up with ideas and this ties into the question that was asked earlier about feedback, doesn't mean we're doing everything that people share as like, hey, this is important, we should be doing this or not doing this. But once a decision is made that this is what we've learned and this is what we're going to do, laying out a really cohesive plan and communicating that expectation really well, that earns tremendous trust in your workplace. And without trust, there is no maximizing engagement. It just doesn't happen. And so that's a great opportunity, especially the smaller you are, the easy, as far as number of people, when you're dealing with organizations with 10 or 15 people, it's much, much easier. You can earn a lot of trust by going, hey, we asked, you guys gave us feedback. Here's what or you shared this feedback. Here are 2 or 3 things we're doing differently, and then create accountability around actually doing that and communicating updates on it. Every time you do that, you're depositing a little bit more into the employee trust bank.
Tom, do you have anything to add? Because you had you had a smaller organization, right? Like 10 to 15 or 15 employees.
Yes, we did. Well, when we sold, we had 80 people, and they all weighed in. They all attended our quarterly meetings, and I knew 95% of them by first name and knew their families. Okay, and that's so key. Employee needs to be known that his value to that company is worth something, and nothing happens better than that than coming from his manager, depending on what size company you have, or the owner. Once they realize they're not just a number, they realize they're part of the operation. And granted, all employees don't want to be in a culture like that, and that's fine. I mean, we had those issues. We offered we offered them to leave. We'll write you a check right now for $1,000 if you've been here for a year and you're not happy at this culture that we have these meetings and we engage like this. There's the door. Write you a check. We did it for 2 years. You've been here for 2 years. We'll write you a $2,000 check. Thank you for your services. So a lot of people don't want to be in a culture like that, but it's up to the business to drive a culture like that and hire the people that do want to be in a culture where their comments, their thoughts, their personal lives matter to the operation and the company, and they have a place in that company to be a part of that team. It's all about being on the team.
Tom, you just mentioned everybody matters, and I reflect back on Barry Wayne Miller's CEO, his book, Everybody Matters. It's a fantastic read, and the story behind the success and growth of Barry Wayne Miller and the fact that they were an industrial manufacturing company and they didn't have a single layoff in the 2008-2009 decline is testimony to the way they took care of their people, and they got feedback and they built a culture around caring about people genuinely. It's awesome.
And that's what Marianne alluded to earlier. When you build an operation from the ground up, you can build that organically. As mentioned earlier, from 08 to 15, we quadrupled in size. We never felt a slowdown of a so-called economy slowdown. Our comment around our office and our shop and our employees, if the economy gets any slower, we won't be able to keep up. And that's just a matter of culture and engaging all the employees.
Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button here. Okay. Okay, sorry. I lost my chat window for a second. is there any other ways we can think of to, what are some ideas to improve empowerment and improve alignment? And if the leadership is of the company is a problem, what can be done? It's kind of like a three-part thing.
On that last part about if it's leadership is the problem, what can be done? We need to have a little more clarification, like which leaders. If it's the founder of the company, right? If it's the CEO that's calling all the shots and somewhat of a benevolent dictatorship, then that's a very different answer than, as we were talking about earlier, where you might have a key leader that is not aligned, if you will.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It doesn't really say, but maybe could you just talk about if it is a key leader, not the founder? I don't think, I mean, I'm assuming it's not the founder. If the leadership of the company is a problem, what can be done?
I mean, I'll start off, you know, unless anybody else wants to jump in and just say so to build on Gregg's point, you know, it depends on whether that leader is the founder, the owner, or somebody that has been brought in by the founder, the owner. I mean, if it's the founder or the owner, you've got a fairly significant problem, because if you lack the ability as an owner, founder, and then that's where your leadership authority emanates from. And if you lack the ability to look in the mirror and accept where you yourself should change, and to be able to consider the possibility that, you know, maybe at times there are things that you need to do to improve to the betterment of the team, then you're in a really, really awkward position. It doesn't really matter who you bring in. I mean, they're going to tell you that, but if you're not willing to do it, if you're not willing to make the changes and lead that by example, there's not a lot ultimately that the organization at the end of the day is not going to benefit. So that's going to be a huge challenge. And I think if it's a senior leader and that senior leader reports to a board, and there's a little bit more of a structure there, a little bit more of a system there for assessing capabilities and whether or not they're buying in, you know, at the end of the day, letting that person go would be unfortunate and somewhat disruptive, but not as disruptive as keeping a senior most leader that refuses to buy into the changes that are necessary for the business. So, you know, I mean, there are a couple of different answers that are at different ends of the spectrum, but once again, to Gregg's point, it really depends on who you're talking about.
I can take the question as the entire leadership team, just to give a comment about that. Many times I've heard our leaders just don't understand. They don't get it. They ask for our input and they never do anything about it. And that creates a very apathetic environment. It's horrible. There's also a little quote that I'm very fond of, and it's called, "The bottleneck is always at the top of the bottle." And so when you're trying to get movement in a company, and I was in this environment, I was in a very large bureaucratic organization, and it was very frustrating to have a lot of energy and drive only to be stifled by the leadership of the company. And they were not embracing input from the people. They just do your job and don't argue with us, just do what we say. Whereas what we've talked about today is soliciting input. If you were to do an anonymous survey with your team, you would reveal that kind of feedback. You guys just don't listen. And then they can reflect on that and decide whether or not they want to change or not. And unfortunately, some companies don't. The leadership team is strong. They don't want the input. They want to do their own thing, and they're driving it. And they're getting the results they want, although it may not be the results the team wants, all the employees, which I would suggest would drive engagement downward. So at the entire leadership team level, this could be a problem.
I think just like any other situation, you're trying to sell something in an organization or an idea to doing something different, you have to build the business case for it. So in this case, usually what you tend to see is leaders come together and they start to look at what is it costing us when this particular leader is behaving the way they're behaving or not behaving the way we want them to. And people soon start to realize that, you know, when the trust is eroded, everything tends to take longer and cost more to do. Right. So when we build the business case for it, that's how you get people's attention that we need to make a change. And sometimes that change is in leadership. Quite often it is. I see it all the time. I mean, I would say more often than not, when I engage with an organization on some sort of a culture transition, or that obviously is going to lead to some sort of an improvement in customer experience, I let them know up front, if you do a really bang up job implementing, there's going to be some turnover, healthy turnover, because you start to build the case and you start to realize that there's a major cost to the way things are being done, or in this case, with this question, the way people are leading or not leading.
I just wanted to ask everybody, since we're almost at time, to offer some closing thoughts to the audience. We've got about 5 minutes left before I wrap up. We'll go ahead and start with Marc Bowers. Just anything that you think is important that we didn't, or that needs to be explained more, we didn't touch on enough, just some closing thoughts. So we'll go to Marc Bowers and then Barry and then Tom and Gregg.
I'll start and keep it simple and keep it really short and reiterate something that I think has come out in a lot of the answers, and that's simply the 2 words: ask questions.
Mine builds on that. Embrace the genius of others. Ask them what their thoughts are. Don't assume that the people at the top of the company are the smartest people in the company.
Tom, some closing thoughts?
Yeah, getting back to the employees being your most valuable asset. The coworkers, the staff, the employees, they are your most valuable asset of your company. So giving them a chance to contribute to the growth of the company is such a win for all. Giving them that chance. Never treat them as a commodity or refer to them as a worker. They're what makes your machine drive. Whether they're working for a manager or working for an owner, they are what makes the machine drive. Collectively, they're the backbone of your operation. And it's up to a manager or an owner to manage that backbone to be productive and have them engaged by giving them the opportunity to become engaged.
It's interesting that this whole conversation, in the last half hour has gone towards leadership, because the final idea I'll leave the group with is, it's the leader's job to create the environment for more engagement. I mean, it's the leader's job to create the environment. Engagement is both motivation and commitment to do what's right. Motivation is intrinsic. It's inside of every human, right? So it's the leader's job to create the environment. So if you have an organization that has 50% or more truly engaged employees, that's because the leaders are doing a great job creating the environment for more engagement. You can't beg, you can't bribe engagement. It's something the leaders must create the environment for.
Great, thank you, everyone. So it looks like we're at time today, and we hope that you found some value on our panel. We look forward to all of your feedback. Thank you to all of the sponsors. Please feel free to reach out to any of us or any of the panelists. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Here's our information, email, and it's all popped up on the screen. Thank you, Jake. So our sponsors today were Enterprise Bank and Trust, Schmersahl, Treloar and Company, Spoke Marketing, St. Louis Makes, Carmody McDonald. You can find all of our info on LinkedIn. It's been an honor. Check out the screen, and we will see you all back here in 2 weeks on 4/27 at 10 a.m. for our next panel, Why Mapping a Customer Buying Journey Equals More Revenue. So have a great day, and we will see you all next time.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Gregg, Tom, Marc, Barry. Have a good day, everyone.
Enjoyed
Thank you,
it, guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.